Okay, I'll come on to that point in a moment about sentiment analysis and text mining. There are some valid concerns around it, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. So one of the things I was asked to talk about, what are the top KPIs? In many respects, it's a bit like asking somebody what color of jumper they should wear. There are things that are specific to your business, and it should be a tailored piece. A lot of the work that I used to do on my agency side was helping companies to understand what it is that they should measure. I did numerous measurement frameworks, which tend to be quite in-depth, long pieces of work. And actually what I found is that 9 times out of 10, a set of core metrics actually gives you most of what you need. Obviously, I never mentioned that as a consultant, because then I'd half my day rate and so forth. Never a good idea, I found. So getting started with the integrations. The first thing is to build an appetite. So the first and easiest way to do this is just simply to start showing voice of customer, customer satisfaction data in your standard reports. Simply just put them next to each other. The next step is trying to correlate them, show trends rather than just fixed metrics. I tend to try to advocate an idea of 3D data, the idea of having, for every metric, you show a trend of that metric, and then you show a comparator as well as the aggregated metric itself. So every metric has its own context of where it comes from. Associate that voice of customer satisfaction with orders, for example. You can start to see over time, as satisfaction goes down, average order value may start going down. People start getting interested in this data at that point. Lastly, then the goal is to associate these data sources. So everything I talked about at the beginning is true integration of using a key customer ID to link the data sets together. There are some hurdles to do that, but it's not unsurmountable. So, good KPIs. Firstly, a good KPI is what I refer to as an Uber metric. It's not every single thing you can think of measuring. And ideally, you want to have probably around 5 KPIs, no more. If you have more than that, people start getting lost. They don't know what metrics mean what. People start to, you can't share it within an organization. And a lot of what we talked about in the foundation and moving through today is all about trying to get advocacy to use these data and actually move it forward and get stuff done. So a good KPI, it should be a strategic measure of success. It should be actionable. You should be able to do something with it. It should be easy to understand and shared throughout the organization, and should be based on valid. I deliberately don't use the word accurate here. For anyone who is involved in web-captured data, accurate is a painful term. So valid, it should be representative to your business. Try not to spend all of your time getting all the numbers to add up to 100%. They never will. They just need to be representative. So consistent mismeasurement is a lot better than investing hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to fix one report, whereas in actual fact, you could find an error in 20 minutes of looking through the data. So try and get stuff done, act quickly. So looking at survey data first, you can look at the task intent, why people are coming. Trigger surveys either at the end of a particular process or at key stages or key known pain points to try and understand what's coming through. You can capture a trigger URL and then pass that back along with the visitor ID, the cookie values, assuming you've ticked that off in the privacy policies, pass that back into the analytics tool. Again, you can start to segment the customers based on the responses that they're putting forwards. Start to look at the ones that are failing on particular tasks that may be key to your business, and then look at their comments. And this comes back to your point about should you have lots of open questions. People love to write if you give them an opportunity. I did a big project for a UK retail bank. We had 13,000 responses with numerous open text questions. The problem was there was no resource to read them. So the customers were filling out these surveys, long, detailed surveys. It wasn't getting pushed out to the customer services teams. So people were writing huge in-depth replies about every pain point they had, including account numbers, usernames, passwords, telephone numbers, addresses, a whole host of other things that we had to delete for privacy reasons. Nothing happened with it. But from the customer's perspective, they thought they were communicating with the bank. They weren't. They were communicating with a survey provider who couldn't use that data or provide it. So think carefully about how you do it. As Roman mentioned, there are numerous techniques the simplest one is word frequency analysis. Look at what are the most common words that crop up in comments. Get rid of standard words like and, the, of, it. You'll find they come up quite common if you don't remove them. You can then start doing a thing called coding, which is you start pattern matching against known themes, and then you look to see which terms occur. You can then do sentiment analysis, which you try to say for those themes, what is the context in which they're referred? Is somebody saying this is a bad experience or a good experience? Start linking it together. There's actually a really cheap, easy shortcut with this, is if you ask a question of how satisfied you are, use the value of that metric and associate it to the comment. So you instantly get a cheap sentiment analysis of saying that somebody said that they were very satisfied, and then break down the comments based on people that said they were very satisfied versus people that said they were very unsatisfied. It's a very simple way of getting an association there. So analytics, start using the analytics to find out for particular processes, are there significant dropout places through a process, standard funnel analysis. And then on those pages, ask questions on your survey to see why people may be asking those particular problems or having issues there. Try to segment out the customers in the analytics tools for people that start a process. They showed the intent to want to do this, but were unable to complete it. You can then take their visitor IDs or user IDs and then bring that back to find out people that had left surveys, had left feedback, and you can use that to scale it up. Following on the example that Roman mentioned about the telco that we worked for, we used this strategy to change it back from survey responses. We knew the sample rates on the pages, we knew the traffic volumes on those pages. We could extrapolate that back to a percentage of the total customer base that were being impacted by this issue. Reporting that back to the board, when you talk about actual percentage of customers that they could be losing, suddenly we got quite a lot of traction and interest to fix this problem. Rather than just talking about drop-off rates through a survey, it's too dry. You need to talk about customers. And then, as Roman said, you can use the feedback to isolate the problem and give quotes of people who have actually had this. We found customers were writing error messages into their feedback that we could then feed back to the technical teams to resolve it. And as Roman said, we fixed a problem within 48 hours versus something that had been going on for several weeks and hadn't been picked up by any other team. We got a lot of kudos for that, and suddenly became the value of integrating data became much more important. So as I say, from experience, big strategic projects of voice of customer programs can be helpful for certain reasons and for certain purposes, but tactically, 5 key questions I found to be massively helpful. Keep it simple, keep the survey short to minimize drop-off through the survey. So task intent, as I mentioned, a list defined by you as the company of what you think the key objectives would be for your site. Often that's a difficult list to compile, surprisingly difficult often. Did they achieve it? Could they actually physically go through and do this? And make this as a drop-down, yes, no, or partially. The partials can often give you a lot more insight. Ease of use, and this is increasingly a common metric that I'll mention in a moment, customer effort scores or net easy scores. How easy did they find to complete that process? Recommendation or net promoter score, NPS, would they recommend your product or service or your website to their family or friends? Shown to closely correlate to economic performance. And then finally, one open text question, normally limited to maybe 1,000 characters to keep the processing of this information simple and straightforward. So NPS gets talked about a lot. Just out of interest, for everyone in the room, hands up who knows what NPS is. Okay, that's pretty much the number of people in your organization who say they know what NPS is versus who actually does know what NPS is. NPS is an extrapolated metric. And the idea is based on the recommendations question, where you ask people, would they recommend your product or service to family or friends? You ask them to rate it on a 0 to 10 scale. 10 being yes, absolutely. 0 being no way at all would they do this. You then divide those scores up. Anyone who scores between 0 and 6 is classed as a detractor. Anyone who scores 9 or 10 is classed as a promoter. So an NPS score is the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. Even the explanation of that I get bored with. Most people find it very difficult to understand what the hell this means. So it fails on the transparency metric from my opinion. The net easy score, very similar in structure, but again asking the ease of use, similar calculation about looking at the percentage of people that marked it as easy minus the percentage of people that looked at it difficult. So why do people use this? Well, it comes from a very long time ago that there was an economic theory that dictated that based on the NPS score, it correlated very closely to longer-term profitability and increased spending power. But actually, it turns out that the customer effort score works much better. It tends to be a good score. Personally, asking 2 questions, they give slightly different views on it. I'd recommend keep doing both. but focus when you report on customer satisfaction and do use NPS, that people actually know what you're talking about. Do not assume that they do. We worked with an organization who decided to class detractors, anyone who scored between 0 and 4, and tried to benchmark in the industry. They came out quite well because obviously they weren't including as many detractors. It took a long time to find that out because people were just giving a top-level NPS score. I'm going to talk briefly about a concept called RFML analysis, and this is about recency, frequency, monetary, and latency. I'm going to be quick on this. If anyone's interested, come to me afterwards. But the idea here is recency is how recently did someone come to the website, make their last purchase? How frequently do they come to the website? Did they make purchases? How much money did they physically spend with you? And then what was their latency? It could be between their first visit and their first purchase, or between their 2 purchases. Why is this interesting? Well, you can start to score your visitors and pump this back into CRM record. Anyone that's come, for example, a recency score, who hasn't been to your site in the last 6 months, you score them a 0. Anyone that's come within the last week, give them a score of 3. You build that up for each of the different ones, and then add those scores together. And anyone that's got a high recency score, high frequency score, high monetary score, high latency score, they're highly valuable customers to you. Making everyone in your customer services team, retail, web, aware of that means you're not going to irritate a high-value customer. So a brief case study of Staples. They looked to do this. They formed 2 groups by analyzing the RFML. They found one group visited within the last week. They made 6 or more visits, but they only had an average order value of 15 quid, and they came recently within the last week. Another group, however, who came within the last 6 months, so lower scores on the first ones, but their average order value was £350. So focusing on their marketing on Group B to increase the frequency of their attendance will increase the revenues coming through. So it's a very quick whistle-stop tour of quite a complex subject, but effectively you can use that form of analysis to start bringing it through. So the final thing I was going to say here is starting to build effective customer feedback models. This is one that I've started to advocate, of looking to create measurement, act, and advocacy. You form in data from voice of customer, from surveys, from web analytics, from transactional and operational tools, and then bringing in more traditional usability techniques and user experience studies. You automate what you can and feed that out tactically to teams who need to know that early. Get the stuff fixed that you can early. You can automate this stuff. You then have data analysis, sentiment analysis, process analysis that takes longer, and then you have workshops that you feed across the different teams. But more importantly, throughout all of this, remember that your customers are willing to share data with you. Don't forget them in this process. Make sure you feed that information through to customer services so customer services can contact somebody that's given low scores in terms of their satisfaction. And then create advocacy. Apple did this, for example, and they found that for every hour their managers spent talking to detractors when they left their store, they generated an additional $1,000 in revenue from those customers. Those detractor customers became advocates of the brand. So Apple isn't the most valued company in the world for no reason. They do look at this stuff. And on that, I will finish.
Okay, thank you very much. So for this topic, so you selected Brand Flip as a book. Why did you choose this book?
I quite like the cover is the main reason. The main reason I chose this was really about trying to understand brands and the discrepancy of how a company can perceive their brand versus how your customers will perceive your brand, and how there's now a change in the way that companies are now having to be led by their customers, not trying to push their products on customers. Customers are actually demanding and wanting to be part of that cycle.
So do we have a first question for this one? Yes.
You talked about the net promoter scores. This is the one I knew, but I didn't know about the net easy score. And you didn't explain really how to measure the net easy score. So could you tell me more about that?
Yes, I'll just flip back to this slide. So net easy score up on here. It's slightly different. It's rated on. So the question is, how easy did you find this task? There's specific wording on it, but it does change slightly. But essentially, it's rated on a 1 to 7 score. And what effectively the percentage of easy is anyone that scores 1, 2. The percent difficult is anyone who scores 5, 6, 7. And in the same way with NPS, you take the percentage of easy minus the percentage of difficult to form your customer effort score. It's the same terminology for those different ones, net easy score, customer effort scores, and so forth. That it's been shown to correlate better to longer term performance. Some people try to look at this in a far too granular window, though. You need quite big sample sizes, and you need to look at it probably at monthly levels, which is why they used invoice of customer projects and programs of events where people look at these scores every month, and in my experience, look at them and go, oh, yes, that's lovely, and then do nothing. So actually, it's a question of saying, for people that are detractors, do something with that. Get your customer services team to talk to them, for example. So yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Do we have a second question in the back?
How could you advise to companies who propose services to choose their KPIs?
So how would I advise companies to choose their KPIs?
Yes, but companies who don't sell a product but a service.
So for companies that don't sell services, was that so?
No. My question is how to advise companies who propose services and not products.
For companies that sell services, not products, how would I choose the right? So normally the first thing is understanding the business objectives of any business. I tend to use a Moscow analysis of must have, should have, could have, won't have, and speaking to the key business owners to understand what they need to do their job. And it goes back to the good KPI. And that's often a challenge process. Quite often you go into a room and say, what do you want to measure? And somebody gives you a massive booklet of everything they can possibly think of measuring, and then want you to produce a dashboard of that, for example. Actually, you need to strip all of that back, step back from metrics and numbers, and go back to what they need to do their job, what makes them look good in their organization. And that doesn't really matter whether you're selling services or products. It's about how you want to push that forwards. If it's service orientated, the ideas of customer retention becomes much more important. Whereas if it's product, it's much more about upsell, cross-sell, potentially. So understanding your customer groups may be more important, but understanding and producing a measurement framework is helpful to understand those metrics and distill them out. But there is a process that you can go through to then say, based on everything you want to measure, strip back everything that you don't need, try to force people to look at only 5 metrics. There's a concept in human memory of working memory, of being able to remember no more than 7 plus or minus 2 items. There are some ways around that, but if you think about that from data visualization or dashboards, people aren't able to deal with thousands of metrics. They simply can't make an informed decision on that. So you need to force them to look at less and then make it a narrative. So if the metrics are lower, they can investigate and ask teams to build it through. That's a very long-winded version to that question, I'm afraid. But.
So we have time for a very quick and short question and answer. One last quick and... No? Okay, so I think...
Certainly quick.
Yeah. So I think we can move on then to our last topic now. Jingle, please.